The sharp scent of disinfectant hung in the back of my throat as I paced the linoleum hallway, the soles of my sneakers squeaking softly with every anxious step. The overhead lights were harsh and cold, making the walls and the oil-painted saints look jaundiced and old. Tiago sat hunched on the threadbare couch at the end of the hall, thumbs scrolling his phone, his expression unreadable. A few meters away, my mother stood in front of room 308, shoulders trembling, her knuckles white around a crumpled tissue. Uncle Marco was beside her, posture ramrod straight, peering above his thick glasses at any nurse who happened to pass. Everyone waited for news, suspended in this corridor somewhere between faith and dread. I checked my watch for the third time in a minute, counting down something I couldn't name. I tried again, mentally, quietly, to rehearse what I'd say to my father if he woke up. If, the word clanged in my stomach, heavy, sharp, and mean. I remembered how small he'd looked earlier, frail under the weight of white sheets and a plastic mask, limbs tangled in tubes. The monitor by his bed blinked and hummed, stubbornly regular, as if holding out hope even when we were struggling to. "He's your father, Clara," my mother's voice broke the silence, brittle with exhaustion. "You can't just fight with him, not," she pressed her eyes, sniffed, "not now." I stopped a few paces away. Uncle Marco shifted, standing half in the glow of the overhead lamp, half in shadow. Tiago didn't look up, but I could feel his attention on me too. I made myself speak as calmly as I could. "I know me, I'm not here to fight. I just—" My mother cut me off with a shaking head, face crumpled by grief and frustration. "Why do you always have to push it? Even now," there was old pain in her voice, the kind that comes from loving someone you just can't change. Uncle Marco finally spoke from behind his glasses, his breath fogging the lenses. "There's enough going on. This isn't the time, Clara. All this performance," he spat the word. "Why can't it wait? Your father needs peace." "Obsession," he said, like he was scraping burned rice out of a pot. I felt anger and shame coil in my gut. Here in this hospital, where nurses muttered in soft Portuguese, where machinery ticked out hope second by second, my fight seemed selfish, even ridiculous. "I'm not performing," I said quietly, forcing the words out around the tightness in my chest. "I just need him to know who I am before it's too late." From the small square window in the door, I saw my father in his bed, a tangle of tubes and white hair, chest rising with uncertain rhythm. Tomorrow the doctor would make his rounds. Tonight we all waited as if we'd already accepted what might come. It was hard not to remember the last time I said goodbye to him, 5 years ago. Back then, I'd barely crossed the threshold into adulthood and already defied his plans for me. He had always been proud, a history teacher who trusted practical things. He wanted me to finish my studies and become an engineer or at least a statistician, something reliable, something that made sense. But I had told him I wanted to be a data artist. He'd looked at me, face as pale as chalk, and tried to explain again for the 100th time that numbers were for earning a living, not for art. Art, he said, was for decoration, not for life. I wanted to show him otherwise. That belief propelled me to Berlin, to cold nights and borrowed beds, freelance jobs and galleries that never answered my emails. At first, every day in that noisy, lonely city was a strain. I lived off instant noodles, learned to drink bad coffee, and lost myself in painting patterns and writing code, building things only I cared about. The calls home grew shorter, then rare. My family spoke less, their words always circling around what I was doing, never really asking about it. Sometimes I resented them for it, sometimes I missed them more than I could stand. It was Magda who first truly saw my work. She was an editor, a brisk, unsentimental German woman who came to a shabby open studio one night and lingered over my interactive cityscapes. She watched as colors swirled in response to touch, the secrets of Sao Paulo told in moving, shifting light. "You make them see their home in a whole new way," she said, fierce and certain. Magda passed my portfolio to a curator in Sao Paulo. With startling speed, an invitation arrived, an offer to show my work in a major exhibition on urban life. Even then, I nearly turned it down. What if I failed? What if my family saw and only found more reasons to be ashamed of me? But I had to go. I spent my last euros on a ticket, closed my cold little apartment and flew home. Arrival was overwhelming. I was slapped by humidity, by chaos, by the sheer noise I'd forgotten I needed. Watching the city flash by in the taxi, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. The museum was a cathedral of white echoes and polished floors. My installation, a curved panel of glass, glowing with projected travel, births, deaths, celebrations, sat in the center, alive with color and sound. Rivers of data transformed into the breath of my own city. On a morning thick with dread, I messaged my mother. I texted Tiago, reminded him of the opening. Uncle Marco didn't answer. I told myself I didn't care. They came anyway, my mother drawn and nervous, Tiago slouching at her side, Marco grim as ever, my father still recovering at home, unable to manage the crowd and the excitement. I guided them through the gallery, introducing them to my Sao Paulo, neighborhoods mapped in ribbons of light, the story of migration told through flowing streams of color, old music echoing from speakers overhead. My mother's hand trembled as she reached out, tracing the path from her childhood block to the industrial district where she'd met my father. Blue and gold light responded to her touch, blooming under her fingers. She stared, awe mixing with sorrow. Uncle Marco paused at a map showing housing evictions, a kaleidoscope of suffering but also resilience. For a moment he said nothing. Eventually he shook his head, as if reconsidering an old argument. Tiago wandered to a visual timeline of football victories and music festivals, his world rendered in wild, celebratory color. He grinned despite himself. "You made all of this?" he asked, voice small, almost proud. I nodded, unable to voice the emotion that threatened to choke me. For the first time, the divide between us felt like it might close. And then, against all odds, my father arrived. He shuffled inside with the help of a cousin and a cane, face pale but fierce. The gallery hushed. He walked with slow determination to where we stood beside the glowing table, took my hand, and asked wordlessly to see. I placed his trembling palm on the glass. With the softest brush of his finger, the interactive city responded. Lights rippled out, our block, then the neighborhoods he'd taught in, the roads he'd walked, the parks where he'd watched us play as children. The data became story, the numbers became lives. My father gazed at me, searching my face as if for the first time in years he really saw me. And I saw him too, my skepticism fading, pain giving way to understanding. He squeezed my hand. "You built this from numbers, Clara." "From stories," I whispered. He looked at me with something like apology, something like pride. I didn't know numbers could feel this way. I pressed my forehead to his knuckles. All the old anger, years of wandering and doubt receded under the weight of that small exchange. As the gallery emptied, my family lingered. I watched my mother take photos. I listened as Tiago told a stranger, "My sister did this." Uncle Marco stood awkwardly nearby, not quite ready to speak, but somehow softer than before. We drove home in a car that was silent but peaceful. The streetlights scattered gold across the windows. The city, for all its noise, felt finally familiar again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the living room window, painting the walls with patterns I recognized from all my work, layered, complex, beautiful. I sat with a cup of milky coffee and waited for the quiet steps of my family. The old snapshots, the peeling map by the door, none of it had changed, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. My father wandered in, slower than before but smiling. He sat with me and wrapped his fingers around the cup I prepared for him. There were no speeches, just gentle silence, an understanding that didn't need explanation. The years of doubt, the struggle for belonging and for meaning faded in that golden light. I finally saw that leaving hadn't been the betrayal I'd always feared. Coming home wasn't surrender, but a kind of return to myself. And as the city stirred again outside, I knew, being seen by those I loved at last was its own kind of arrival.